Thank you very much, Father Cyril. We're now going to Professor Norbert Samuelson, who has like 20 minutes before lunch to put us through physical science and Jewish eschatology.
Thank you. I'm going to tell you what I'm not going to talk about, and if there's a chance for discussion, which with 20 minutes there probably won't be, here's the questions I would like you to ask. Why do you do what you do? Why do you answer philosophical questions with historical answers? And why do you tell stories? Now, let me say a word in terms of Templeton Foundation before I start talking about what I want to talk about. There's certainly over a decade, maybe 2 decades, of involvement with the Templeton Foundation has had important effects on me, but mainly in terms of people, intellectually in terms of people. So let me just isolate 2 meetings, 4 people, and give thanks to the Templeton Foundation for making it possible. There was a meeting that CTS had decades ago at Berkeley, sponsored by Bill Russell, that enabled me, one, to meet Bill Russell and Phil Clayton. Bill is Phil, Phil is not. Through them, I got a whole new agenda for doing science and religion, which would not have happened without that Berkeley meeting. The other important meeting was a meeting managed through MetaNexus in Barcelona, where I met Jeffrey Cantor and John Brooke, from whom I became convinced, from the 2 of them, that the only way to do Jewish thought, at least, is historically, and much that the way they do history is the way to do Jewish thought. That'll be evident in what I say. The story part won't. I used up 2 minutes, so that gives me 13 minutes to go on to what I want to talk about. I want to tell a story, and the story is about creation and light. And the thesis is a John Brooke thesis. The thesis is that as the Jews, or the rabbis in any case, were exposed to the dominant culture around them, what they had to say on their theological views changed. Also a belief that what the Jews had to say on their theological views affected what was being said in the science. The theological part, the Jewish part, is redemption. The scientific part of it is light. Now, I'm going to insist somewhat hypercritically not to take biblical texts as metaphorical. Metaphoric may be a move, but it's not an initial move. And even if the discussion of light within the religious text is initially a metaphor, is ultimately a metaphorical use, every metaphor presupposes that you understand what the term means in its non-metaphorical meaning. So if the non-metaphorical meaning of a term changes, then the metaphor has to change too. And I'm sort of tracing that out. That's background to the story. But the focus is on light. In Genesis, chapter 1, if you read the text hypercritically, or I should say, if you read the text hyperliterally, the only thing that's created is light. Everything else was already there. The verb to create, bara, which is also a verb that's used in other forms for separating curds and whey with milk, and is also a term that's used for health, a health that results from separation. So that the basic meaning of the term has to do with health and separation. It has nothing to do with creation as we use the word creation. The right word for creation is yatsar or asa. But the use of the word bara is a term in that form that's used only when God is the actor and the world is the object upon which it's being acted. So probably the best way to translate bara Elohim is not God created, but it's God God. And if you don't know what it means to say God God, that's right. If you don't know what the word bara means, that's the correct assumption. But remember, it has something to do with separation. Now, the light that's created at the beginning, which is the only thing that's created, everything else is separated out, doesn't exist. On the 6th day, that light is taken away. The light that we have, which is starlight, is a pale substitute for that original light. Where that original light is, what that light is like, the biblical text does not tell us. Now, stage 2, I'll jump to the rabbis. So where does the rabbis put us? It puts us, am I right? It puts us in the Hellenistic period. The rabbis ask, quite intelligently, most of the questions that the rabbis ask actually are there in the biblical text. And the questions they ask is, 1, where's the light? Where's the light now? And 2, what was the light like? Let's take what the light is like. With that light, you could see from one end of the universe to the other, from the beginning of time to the end of time. In other words, this light enables anyone who sees to see everything everywhere in a single glance. In answer to the question, where is it now? It is reserved for the end of days. So the light that comes at the end of days is this light that would enable anyone who can see to see everything everywhere in a single glance. Or, in other words, to see as God sees. The sign that we're in this end of days, this messianic age, this redemptive period, is the return of that light. Now we're jumping to the Middle Ages, since it's a 15-minute story. What happens with the adoption of Aristotelian philosophy as a model for conceiving is the notion of light is lost. Now, basically, Aristotle knows there's light, and the Aristotelians know that it's life, but they never give it an ontological status. If you make a list in the Aristotelian philosophy of what exists in the world, there's no light. Now, how that's related to vision and how that's related to heat, that's a separate question. There's heat. There is heat. Heat is the quality of particles, atoms, but nothing specifically called light. Now, the opposite out of that philosophy, if you go in that philosophical tradition, is Plato of the Timaeus. And the Timaeus is used heavily by medieval philosophical commentaries to interpret creation. In fact, in the hands of the medieval commentators, the image of the origin of the universe in the Timaeus becomes the model for interpretation, the meaning of Scripture. Now let's say a word about Scripture. The following is given. There is not one word in all of Scripture that means what it says. So the minimum you know is any literal interpretation of Scripture at any point you know is prima facie a wrong interpretation. Then the question is to find among all the non-literal interpretations which is the interpretations that are right, and that's where Plato and Aristotle come to play. Now, to go to the scientific side of the story, the science of the Hellenistic period, now I'm quoting, again, mostly John Brooks, the science of that period of time is good about telling us about the problems of the geometry of vision. It's good on vision. And there's other people at this period who are good at telling us the anatomy of the eye seeing, but not what light is. The parallel to that is a person also I know from Templeton Foundation, Brian Catwell Smith, who has a wonderful book about the ontology of information. Information is a good example here. It's a metaphor, an analogy. We all know there's information, but nobody knows what it is. We all know that everything involves, particularly in biology today, dealing with information, but ontologically, information has no status. Make a list of the things that exist in the world. Information is not an existent entity in the world. Isn't it strange? Isn't it strange to have a view of the world that's so dominant and what is the center of that vision of the world has no ontological status. In the Middle Ages, that's what light is. They all know about light, it's all affected by light, but it doesn't exist. It acts, but it has no existence. The change will come with Newton. With Newton, not only does light become something that exists, it becomes the center feature of the ontology. Everything is ultimately reduced to light. Now I have to get really speculative. And I'm going to give you two very speculative steps that I don't know that I believe yet. And those speculations are due largely to a historian, Francis Yates. Where light falls out of medieval Jewish philosophy, it comes back in Kabbalah big time. And that'll put us somewhere between the 14th and the 16th century in Spain, southern Spain. Now, the way light comes back is in a cosmogony that tells us the origin of the universe. The Kabbalists, at least in the Zohar, read hyperliterally the judgment that the world was created in the image of God. Let me tell you what that means hyperliterally. The universe looks like a human being. And if you do a map of of the stages of the cosmology that goes through the Zohar, you have a head, you have arms, you have limbs. What it means to say that man is created in the image of God, B'Tselem Elohim, is the shape of the universe is a human image. Now, they're not presenting that rationally, depending what rational means. It means they're not presenting it algebraically. They're presenting it imaginatively. And the use of imagination is through geometry, not through algebra. So it emerges as a set of pictures, not as a set of propositions. Excuse me. Now, if we take the head of the universe, there are 3 steps in the head, and the 3 steps all involve light. The first thing, Chokhmah, wisdom, is a point of light. It's an infinite point of light. That infinite point of light spreads out into kind of a halo, also understood as a vagina, because it's a circle, which is Bina. And the intercourse, the cosmic intercourse between that point of light that is Chokhmah and that spread out whole from the light that is Bina produces the world in a series of steps. The relationship to that trinity, footnote is an interesting question. It is a kind of trinity. It may be consciously trinity, but that doesn't have anything to do with light. I care about light. So I just mentioned that in passing and let that go. But again, whereas the philosophers in their interpretation of Scripture had done away with light, the Kabbalists in the 5th, 16th century bring that light back in a dominant ontological place in the universe as Newton did. Now, what I'm saying as a presentation of the Kabbalah is very close, not to an early modern Jewish scholar, but to an early modern Christian scholar. There is in the 16th century, in Italy, at the University of Rome, a Platonist by the name of Patrizzi. And Patrizzi's view of the universe is also a view, as in the Kabbalah, that he gets rid of all 4 elements except the element light. There's only light and only heat, and then uses that to give an account of the world. How did Patrizzi get that? I don't know. In part, he may get it the way the rabbis got it, which is through using the Timaeus to interpret the creation story. Or he may know Kabbalah. And that's where Francis Yates comes in. If Francis Yates is right, or almost right, the minimum that we know through Francis Yates is that our image of the rationalists of Newton and Kepler is a totally wrong image. And that part of the link that's going on is an absorption of all kinds of occult, so-called, we call in retrospect occult, science and insight that affected not only Newton and not only Kepler, but all the members of the Académie Française and all the members of the Royal Society. And that it's a dominant view that we encounter Jewishly through Spinoza. That brings me to the beginning of modernity. That's as far as I can go with the time that I've had, and I thank you for you letting me tell this story.
Thank you very much, and for being so conscious about time as well. Well, we covered techno-future, scientific atheism, and Kabbalah in 1 hour. That's quite an achievement. And I think it leaves us with a few minutes for questions. Just let me ask, since we started a bit late, can we go just a little bit over one? Just a little, yes. I'm conscious you might be hungry as well as I am. So, but some questions, please. There's
Stephen Post, Stony Brook. So for Hava, I have a question. Are you reading about DSM-5 and the new category for addiction disorder and the internet? Are you reading these books like I Crazy and Alone Together and so forth? Because there's been such a medical response in the last 5 years to really the pathological aspects of children reared from very young ages on virtual reality, and it's interfering with the whole flow of spiritual and social virtues and character assets from one generation to another. Generativity is being destroyed. Unless we get it, it's not that it's all bad, but we have to get a handle on it because the destructive potentiality is so high. Even though Ray Kurzweil and others of the postmodernists celebrate this kind of reality, in fact, it's something that presents a tremendous spiritual difficulty in terms of progress.
Oh, no, yeah, in case it wasn't clear, I thought it's pretty clear, but in case it's not clear, I'm very much a critic of the transhumanist discourse. But I'm saying that we have not paid sufficient attention to how important it is to our culture. So that the transhumanists, the popularization of transhumanist theme, and even in terms of enhancement, they're going to have the upper hand. And a lot of what we're trying to do, I'm trying to, in a not very successful way, maybe say slow down. Do precisely what you suggest, which is to look at the negative impact of enhancement technologies, for example, or the cultural spread of those modalities. And I don't know that the criticism will succeed. Right now, we are dismissed as bioconservatives. That's all that happens so far. So I can talk about it, but it's not going anywhere. So I'm glad to hear that the DSM-5 recognizes all the negative impact. But how successful that critique will be remains to be seen.
It's not published yet, but in about 3 months.
Well, that's good, but will that mean that fewer children will get Ritalin in school? No. Probably not. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Where's the Schweiker?
Yeah.
Schweiker, University of Chicago. This began as a question about the transhumanism, but I think it can be translated into a question for each one on the panel, actually. It seems to me that the transhumanist argument is best seen not as secularized religion, but as posing arguably the most trenchant question that we're all facing, which is it good to be only human? Mm-hmm. In other words, is it good to be radically finite? Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you'd like to say more about that.
Yeah.
It seems to me that it's raising really an axiological question, that is, the value of finite being.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, I think many religious traditions under that reading can be seen as transhumanist as well. It's back to Polkinghorne's question about the continuity-discontinuity between our current being. So anyone want
No,
to?
that's an excellent question if you want me to start directly on it. I think that the word human is definitely understood negatively in the transhumanist discourse. What they're trying to do is to really reach human obsolescence, okay? So they create a system in which the machine will be the only name in town, right? Not the human. So being human is definitely something bad to get rid of. Now, what I'm trying to suggest in the research on transhumanism, that when you really peel off the technological conversation, you really see some deep-seated religious impulses that Robert Garrison shows go all the way back to roughly the 2nd century BC among the apocalyptic movements of the Jews in the ancient.
Problem as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think that all of us indeed have to think through what does it mean to be human, but they clearly think that biology is bad and let's transcend biology. And I think that we need to speak up against it. I actually like the fact, I think it's Jeffrey Schlosser mentioned Hans Jonas. I've done quite a lot of work on Hans Jonas, and I think that Hans Jonas saw it exactly right. So we need to go back to Jonas and some of his insights and take it further.
Thank you, Professor Novak.
In E.O. Wilson's book On Human Nature, which I believe won a Pulitzer Prize, he said religion cannot be suppressed. And the example he gives was that at no time did the Russian Communist Party have more members than the illegal Russian Orthodox Church. Is that correct?
Well, we don't have numbers about the members of the catacomb believers or hidden believers. There is an estimation that regardless of the historical circumstances, like communism or persecutions against the church, the percentage of those who really identify themselves with the church did not go beyond 20% of the population before the Soviet Revolution and after the Soviet Revolution, which means that the effect of the Soviet propaganda was close to nil. It means that those who were churchgoers somehow, but were not Christians in a full sense of the word, they just departed from the church under the communist regime. But those who were Christians in a full sense, they remained Christians unless they were extinguished, of course, and unless they were just executed. The same happens now. So in terms of statistics, it's difficult to have a precise statistics on this issue, but in these terms, statistics show that there is an invariability, a constant number of those who are Christians, regardless of the regime and regardless of the ideology. It does not happen with the followers of the communist ideology. It varied and it changed, obviously. So that is a difference and the similarity.
Thank you. We could take one last question. Professor Zoskis? Mic here, please.
Mine was again to Father Cyril, so maybe if there's a question.
Just the
for
mic,
Norbert,
please.
Maybe. Could I thank you, Father Cyril. Could I just, I thought implicit in your analysis was a critique, of course, of atheist materialism, but also perhaps of the church structures. Are some people in the Orthodox Church opposed to integration of theology within the academy even now? That's one thing. And you're now studying at Yale, and of course you're living in the Orthodox diaspora. Is the Orthodox diaspora, do you think, going to be very helpful to the Russian Church in the present moment? Because there are some pretty seamy things going on, we all know.
Yes, there is an opposition, quite surprisingly, within the church to the integration, to a close integration of theology to the secular academia. That's a matter of fact. And actually, me personally, I face this opposition constantly. I was exactly trying to push the theological system to a closer cooperation and integration to both international educational space, if you wish, network, and to the Russian state system. There are fears in the church, that such an integration will affect negatively the theology as it is. And those fears dominate among the circles, well, conservative circles, I would say. And in this regard, those conservative or preservationist circles, they coincide in their agenda with the post-Soviet groups in the Russian academia. As regards the interaction with the diaspora, yes, I think the diaspora can help, and more importantly, I'm sure that internationalization, getting international for the Russian or for the post-Soviet theology, if you wish, when it gets closer to the international networks, it contributes to its growth and its improvement. So it's not only a matter of diaspora; it's a matter of international community to help theology to develop in that setting, post-Soviet setting, which still tends to be introvertic. It tends to be isolationist and tends to close up again, unfortunately.
Thank you. That certainly is an inspiring thought for us to carry on the good work. Let's join me in thanking the panel.